Actor Mathew Perry has died. The beloved friend's store was reportedly discovered in the jacuzzi of his L.A. area home this afternoon.
While their investigation is still ongoing, federal authorities say they believe they know who is responsible for Mathew Perry's death.
Law enforcement today announced the arrests of 2 doctors and 3 others in connection with the actor's fatal overdose.
On October 28, 2023, Mathew Perry was found unresponsive in the hot tub of his Los Angeles home, and almost immediately the story seemed very familiar. A beloved celebrity with a long history of addiction had died. But that's not what happened. Because in the weeks and months that followed, investigators started uncovering details that raised more questions than answers. Questions about where the ketamine came from, questions about the people surrounding Perry during the final weeks of his life, and questions that eventually led to arrests, criminal charges, and a much larger investigation than anyone expected. Everyone remembers Mathew Perry's battle with addiction, but what most people don't know is what investigators discovered after his death, and why Mathew Perry's story didn't end in that hot tub. Let's talk about it. Long before Mathew Perry became one of the most recognizable faces on TV, he was already struggling with something far less visible. From the outside, his life looked like the dream. He had the fame, the money, and hella success. Millions of people knew him as Chandler Bing, the sarcastic and lovable character that helped make Friends one of the biggest sitcoms in television history.
I'm not great at the advice. Can I interest you in a sarcastic comment? Some cheese.
But behind the scenes, a different, very different story was unfolding. A story that Mathew Perry would spend decades trying to escape. Many people trace the beginning of that battle back to a jet ski accident that happened in the late 1990s. After the accident, Perry was prescribed pain medication, and at first it was meant to help him recover, but instead it became the start of a dependency that would follow him for years. What made the situation even more dangerous was the fact that his addiction was growing at the exact same time his fame was exploding. While Friends was becoming a cultural phenomenon, Perry was fighting a battle that most viewers didn't even know about. And over time, that battle began to take control of his life. I'm talking rehab stays, relapses, health scares, and hospital visits.
But you actually had, you were in treatment for something, substance abuse?
Yeah. It's been pretty well documented that I had some problems with alcoholism and addiction, and before this movie was over, I left the film to go get help,
By his own admission, there were entire periods of Friends that he barely remembered filming. And while addiction would become one of the defining struggles of his life, it would also make him vulnerable to something much bigger years later. Something that wouldn't fully come to light until after his death. By the 2000s and 2010s, Mathew Perry's addiction was no longer something happening quietly. The struggle had become public. Fans watched as he repeatedly entered rehab, fought to get sober, relapsed, and then started the process all over again. For years, it seemed like Mathew Perry was trapped in a cycle he simply couldn't escape. But in 2018, the cycle nearly killed him. Due to complications connected to years of opioid abuse, Perry suffered a life-threatening medical emergency. His colon ruptured. He was rushed into emergency surgery and was placed into a medically induced coma. Doctors gave him only a small chance of survival, and for months he remained hospitalized. He was literally relying on machines to keep him alive. At one point, his survival odds were estimated to be around 2%, but somehow he survived. And once again, he found himself facing a choice that had defined much of his adult life. Either addiction would finally win, or he would find a way to keep fighting. And in the years that followed, Perry appeared determined to do exactly that. He spoke openly about his struggles. He shared his story. He wanted people to learn from the mistakes he had made. For the first time in a long time, it seemed like Mathew Perry might actually be turning a corner, which is why what happened next caught so many people off guard. See, what you gotta understand is by 2023, Perry had survived more than most people could imagine. He had written a memoir and he was speaking openly about recovery.
Congratulations on the book. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
How's the process been of just talking about it?
It's been, what it's all about is helping people. And I've heard already 5 stories of people that read the book and checked into treatment.
And from the outside, it appeared as though he was trying to build a new chapter of his life. But behind the scenes, things were becoming more complicated. Part of that complication involved ketamine. Ketamine itself wasn't necessarily unusual. In recent years, the drug had been used in supervised medical settings to treat depression, anxiety, and other mental health conditions. Perry had been receiving ketamine infusion treatments through legitimate medical channels. But somewhere along the way, something changed. And that's where the story starts to get difficult to follow, because investigators would later allege that Perry wasn't simply receiving ketamine through approved treatments. Instead, they claim a network of individuals began supplying him with additional doses outside those medical appointments. Investigators say a different story was unfolding, one that involved private communications, large sums of money, and people who allegedly saw an opportunity in a man who was struggling. And the deeper investigators looked, the more questions they had. Who was supplying the drugs? How long had it been happening? And who stood to benefit from it? Mathew Perry was 54 years old when he died, and news of his death spread almost instantly. Fans around the world were shocked. Friends, cast members released statements and tributes poured in.
Ask Jen, Quinta, what it's like to watch Friends now.
Oh God, don't make me cry.
I won't. We won't make each other cry.
Okay. No, sorry, I just started thinking about.
I know. Yeah. Are you sure? We don't have to really.
No, I'm okay.
And like I said, many people assumed they already knew what had happened. Another celebrity lost to addiction, and at first, even the facts appeared to support that conclusion. Toxicology reports would later reveal that ketamine played a significant role in his death. That answered the question. Case closed. Bop, bop, we're done. But investigators weren't ready to close the case, because as they began looking closer, certain details didn't fit neatly into the story everyone thought they understood. One of the biggest questions involved timing. The ketamine in Perry's system could not be fully explained by the treatment schedule he had been following. So that immediately raised a new question. If the ketamine didn't come from those treatments, then where the fuck did it come from? And that question would eventually lead investigators down a path that nobody expected. So in May of 2024, the LAPD and the DEA officially launched a joint investigation into the source of the drugs. Investigators alleged that Perry had begun seeking larger quantities of ketamine outside of his supervised treatments. And as they followed that trail, a network of people slowly came into focus. According to court documents, one of the key figures was Perry's live-in assistant, Kenneth Iwamasa. Authorities alleged that Kenneth regularly obtained ketamine on Perry's behalf and administered injections directly to him. But investigators say he wasn't acting alone. Their investigation eventually led them to two physicians, Dr. Salvador Plasencia and Dr. Mark Chavez. Dr. Chavez acquired the ketamine that eventually made its way to Dr. Salvador, who then supplied it to Perry. Authorities alleged that the drug was being sold at heavily inflated prices. But the deeper investigators dug, the stranger the story became, because eventually the supply chain moved beyond the doctors. A recovery coach named Eric Fleming helped connect Perry's circle to a North Hollywood dealer named Jasveen Sangha, a woman prosecutors would later refer to as the Ketamine Queen. And Jasveen's home operated as a stash house for narcotics. And by the final weeks of Perry's life, authorities say this network had become the primary source of the ketamine being supplied to him. The numbers alone were staggering. According to court records, roughly $50,000 worth of ketamine was purchased during the final month of Mathew Perry's life. And on the day he died, investigators say he received multiple injections. The ketamine later found in his system was comparable to levels used during surgical anesthesia. But some of the most damaging evidence wasn't physical, it was digital. As investigators examined phones, messages, and communications between the people involved, they began uncovering conversations that painted a disturbing picture. In one message, Dr. Salvador allegedly referred to Perry as a moron and wondered how much money he would be willing to pay. According to authorities, other messages suggested a desire to become Perry's exclusive supplier. In August of 2024, the investigation exploded into public view. Federal prosecutors announced charges against 5 individuals connected to the ketamine supply chain surrounding Mathew Perry. And one by one, the people investigators had spent months tracking began entering guilty pleas. Kenneth Iwamasa, Perry's live-in assistant, he pleaded guilty and became one of the government's key cooperating witnesses.
Today marked the final chapter in the search for accountability in Mathew Perry's overdose death. The actor's personal assistant was sentenced to 3 years and 5 months in federal prison for giving the Friends star the ketamine injections that killed him.
Then there was Dr. Salvador. he pleaded guilty to multiple ketamine distribution charges.
Dr. Salvador Placencia, who admitted to distributing ketamine to the Friend star weeks before he died, was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison today.
Dr. Mark Chavez also entered a guilty plea, and as part of his cooperation, he surrendered his medical license.
The second doctor charged in the overdose death of actor Mathew Perry has learned his sentence.
Mark Chavez will not go to prison. He was sentenced to home detention and supervised release.
The investigation also focused on Eric Fleming, the middleman. He pleaded guilty and received a lengthy federal sentence.
A licensed drug counselor will spend 2 years in prison for delivering drugs to Mathew Perry before his death.
And finally, we have Jasveen, aka the Ketamine Queen. She actually supplied the batch of ketamine linked to Perry's fatal overdose.
A Los Angeles woman sentenced to 15 years in prison after admitting to selling Mathew Perry the ketamine that ultimately killed him.
By 2026, every defendant connected to the case had either pleaded guilty or have been sentenced. But for Perry's family, the convictions didn't bring back the person they lost. During one hearing, Perry's stepfather, Keith Morrison, directly addressed Perry's assistant, Kenneth, and he said, "You did the injections. You could have made the phone call, but you didn't." Even the judge overseeing the case delivered unusually blunt criticism addressing Kenneth's actions. She rejected the argument that he had been powerless to stop what was happening. He could have said no. And as the final sentence were handed down, the story that had begun with Mathew Perry's death had transformed into something much bigger, a story about addiction, exploitation, and money, and the people willing to profit from someone else's struggle. Now, if you guys made it till the end, I appreciate it. And if you want to support the channel, hit that like, hit that subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.